Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's so good to see you as we kick off officially a new year of adult education with Port Jewish Center in partnership with our friends from the Jewish Book Council. I am thrilled to welcome this evening author Susan Shapiro. A little bit about her. She is an award-winning writer and professor. She freelances for all sorts of amazing publications, from the New York Times to New York Magazine to the Wall Street Journal. So many more to list. But she told me that if I said anything about her bio, here's what she wanted me to say. That she's the best-selling author. I don't think she cared if I said best-selling, but that's always nice. The best-selling author, co-author of 15 books her family hates. That's what she wanted me to let you know, including Five Men Who Broke My Heart, Lighting Up, Unhooked, The Bosnia List. So, I don't know. We're going to have to learn a little bit more about those books too, Susan. But that being said, she lives, she's from Michigan originally. You'll hear that soon enough. She lives in Greenwich Village, and where she teaches, actually, she's been teaching on Zoom, writing classes and how to get a book published and all sorts of other things. I'll probably ask you to tell us a little bit more about that work. And she's also works as a professor in teaching schools more academic classes at the New School, NYU, Columbia University. In general, she's just a pretty impressive woman, and we're very lucky to have her here tonight. The reason, of course, that we asked her to come to speak to us this evening is that her most recent book is called The Forgiveness Tour: How to Find the Perfect Apology, and Susan is holding it up. And you know, with Yom Kippur less than 2 weeks away, we've got to start doing this holy work of thinking about forgiveness and what it means for us. And I thought, you know, who better to learn about it from, to get another or several perspectives about forgiveness from than the author of this book, Susan Shapiro. So you don't want to hear from me anymore. I'm going to turn things straight over to you, Susan. We're so happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. And I thought what I would do is start with a short piece about the forgiveness tour that sort of gives you the whole sense of what the book is. And that way people could ask me questions about it. So this was the short piece that started the book. So it's called The Forgiveness Tour, when the only thing better than hearing I'm sorry is saying it. My childhood rabbi once explained that on Yom Kippur, the saddest day of the year, sins we make before God are mercifully erased, but not offenses against fellow humans. To come clean, we have to approach those we've wronged, specify our misdeeds, and beg forgiveness. But what if the one who hurt me refused to express regret? This question haunted me after my falling out with the mentor who had helped my career, marriage, and sobriety. I trusted him for a decade and a half. Then one early September, I found out he'd lied to me. I felt betrayed. I could barely eat, sleep, or work well. He refused to apologize. I wanted to be benevolent and big-hearted, but as a Manhattan journalist, I was skeptical of psychobabbling promises implying any offense could be overcome with an apology. I prided myself on being self-protective and nobody's punching bag. I pondered the line from an ancient battle poem, wounded I am more awake, alas, with no repentance, wounded I was only more miserable. I used to pity volatile friends who wouldn't speak to their relatives or colleagues for years at a time. I didn't want to be an angry person clinging to an endless vendetta. I'd always been forgiving. I forgave the college boyfriend who'd slept with not one but two of my roommates. I even exonerated both of the women, but only after they'd explained they were under the influence of magic mushrooms and asked my pardon. I was fully capable of granting anyone atonement if the sinner first admitted their transgression and coughed up, I'm sorry. Yet now the person I depended on refused to acknowledge he'd injured me. I couldn't understand his cold behavior. I cut him off, but I couldn't move on. $1 billion forgiveness industry popped up on Google. A British charity, a PBS documentary, a Mayo Clinic website touting the personal benefits of exoneration, deserved or undeserved. Books from all religions promoted radical forgiveness for everyone, for everything, to help get rid of the gorilla. I read the titles with frenzied hope, yet my gorilla grew. To ease my distress, I searched for enlightenment. At the Manhattan Soup Kitchen, where I taught a workshop, I asked the Reverend her feelings on forgiving. She said Christians repent for sins during Lent the way Jews atone on Yom Kippur. We're taught to forgive and that God will forgive us if we ask. But the one who hurt me hadn't asked or repented. He knew I was distressed, but didn't think he'd done anything wrong. A Hasidic colleague was more specific. Jewish law requires a person to ask heartfelt forgiveness 3 times, she explained. If the injured party won't forgive, the sinner is forgiven and the non-sinner has to seek forgiveness for not forgiving. Yet the initial request had to be inspired by true regret. A Muslim friend said Allah was merciful, but only after repentance. I felt vindicated, especially when my lawyer cousin added that pleading guilty and expressing remorse was the deciding factor in many legal verdicts. When my mentor emailed, "I'm sorry for the imaginary crime you think I committed," his aggressive tone made me want to commit a real crime. I feared I'd never get an apology to fix what was broken. I asked Batsal, a Hindu-born psychiatrist, how someone who'd been so helpful and generous for 15 years could have changed. "There's something missing from this story," Batsal said. He used the metaphor of a commuter enraged when a woman driving an SUV stopped abruptly to get in the back seat and risked an accident. The other driver couldn't see the SUV driver's infant choking. Similarly, you have no closure because there's an unknown factor you can't see that's essential to understanding what happened, he said. In my sadness and fury, I couldn't figure out what I didn't know. 6 months later, my mentor emailed, "I'm sorry for what happened. If I had it to do over again, I would have acted differently." He asked if he could apologize in person. We met for coffee. "I'm sorry I hurt you," he reiterated. He seemed remorseful. I gripped my glass of water. After questions, I asked, "How's your family?" "Not well." His voice cracked as he explained that a medical procedure his wife needed to remove a tumor turned out to be malignant. 6 months earlier, she'd undergone extensive brain surgery. He thought he was going to lose her. "Is she okay?" I asked, alarmed. "She's recovering, but there's nerve damage. Right now, she's half deaf, can't drive, can't walk without a cane or work or fly without seizures." I had no idea. I felt like crying. This was what I didn't know. I hated how agonized and haunted he looked as he admitted he'd been in denial. I tried to compartmentalize, but I wasn't functioning well or making good decisions, he confided. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Too hard to talk about. If my husband were seriously ill, I'd lose it too. My mentor once told me unhappy people have nothing to give. They need all their energy to function. You get more from a happy person you barely knew." "I feel like I lost a whole year," he said. "I want this bad blood between us finished." Just like that it was. His words halted my rage and elicited my sympathy. My appetite, concentration, and humor returned. Mesmerized by the magic dust of his mea culpa, I scanned my world for other broken bonds. Even when I didn't believe I'd sinned, if I offended someone I cared about, I offered an authentic apology to respect their feelings and erase their pain. That realization felt transformative and powerful. So I borrowed my mentor's gracious apology technique to go on a manic forgiveness binge, wanting to make amends in every relationship I'd screwed up. Over the fall, my close family friend Isabel had asked me to read and edit hundreds of pages of her project on surviving breast cancer. Drained from my deadlines and feud with my mentor, I told her I was too busy. She cut me off, ignoring my emails. Now I could see how important it was for her to share her journey. Blessed with health, I'd selfishly made it about my work schedule. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me," I called her to say. "Want to take my upcoming class and show me your pages this week?" "Susie, I'd love to," she said, using my childhood nickname, canceling out all the bad juju. Knowing my brother had hated something I'd published about his family, I wrote him and his wife a heartfelt letter saying, "I'm sorry. I regret opening my big mouth. I never meant to hurt you." He responded by putting me back on his email list for Republican propaganda. I was in again, and so relieved. In a circle of forgiving everyone I'd wronged pardoned me. I saw that by obsessing over my mentor's disloyalty, I'd been myopic, small-minded, and blind to how lucky I was. Next, I vowed to forgive myself. And so that short piece ran in Salon, an online magazine, and it went viral and won an award. And then all of a sudden, I was able to get a book deal for the book I'd been working on for 10 years. So that's how it started. And that basically is the story that it tells, although obviously a much longer version of it. Yeah, so should we ask Rabbi Mendelson, should we ask if anybody has any questions, or did you want to ask me questions?
Yeah, no, sorry, I just had to unmute myself. I mean, that is such a story, my goodness. And I'm really, I'm really taken by with the idea of the thing that I would be interested in hearing what other people, what stuck out to other people when they were listening to the story. But what really stuck out to me was that idea of, that there's an unknown factor that you can't see, how myopic we can be. And, that was so incredibly powerful to me. And you were reading and I missed, who was the person that said that to you? And, and like, what was it like, what has it been like kind of incorporating that? Because it sounds like you've really incorporated that idea into, how you understand, forgiveness.
Right. So what happened was after it happened, I kind of flipped out and I wound up talking to a lot of rabbis, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Hasid, and I spoke with a lot of people from different religions because I was really interested to find out if there was a difference between the way Christianity or Islam or Hindu um, uh, or Judaism viewed forgiveness. And while I was sort of on this quest, I asked Vatsal Thakur, who was a Hindu born psychiatrist, and he was the one who told me that there's something missing from the story. And he kind of explained it was a little bit Hinduistic, that to have the bigger overview and focus on what you can't see. And at first, it was really frustrating because I believed him, but I had no idea what I couldn't see. And I was like racking my brain trying to figure it out. And I couldn't know until my mentor told me. And yeah, I was absolutely fascinated. And it definitely made me think really carefully about any problems I was having with family or friends or colleagues or students, especially during the pandemic. Say if somebody seemed rude or weird or did something that I felt slighted me, I slowed down and I, definitely thought to myself, what can't I see in this picture? And sometimes what was really great was it caused me to act differently. So, for example, instead of saying, why the hell didn't you show up and get mad at somebody, I would say, my email would be, or my phone call would be, is everything okay? And a lot of times it wasn't. It wasn't okay. Somebody was sick, or somebody didn't have money for rent, or somebody's three kids just moved back in with them and they couldn't do their job. So I will say that really affected me. That probably affected me more than anything in the book. That, and then one other thing, which was, I quote Dr. Aaron Lazar, a late psychiatrist who wrote a book called On Apology, about what is a good apology. And it turns out there's four elements of a good apology, and most people really suck at apologizing. And they say something like, "I'm sorry if you're upset." Not a good apology. So I've actually learned to give really good apologies. "I'm sorry, I screwed up. I didn't mean to. This is what happened. It's never going to happen again. Here's how I'm going to make it up to you." A real full-fledged apology that involves not only saying I'm sorry, but an explanation for why it happened, proving how it's never going to happen again, and is there a reparation? Is there something I could do to fix it? So those were the two things that really, that helped me.
So I think I saw people nodding, as you were just as you were saying those things, and it is like, I think that's one of the things that we all struggle with, is just, to take a beat, to take a breath, and to instead of saying what the to say, like, are you okay? Like, is everything, what am I missing? And I mean, I think we're not ending this now, but like, I could end this now and I would have walked away with like a really huge, like a gem, I think. So thank you for that. You sent me a piece that you wrote for the tablet, and it's called 12 Steps to Forgiveness. And so if it's okay with you, and I don't know if you want to just like pull that up for yourself so that you can like be looking at it also. But I thought I would like ask you about some of those steps and maybe to talk about them a little bit. Would that be okay?
Course.
Yeah. So the second one, by the way, was the one that you just talked about, which is, search for missing pieces of the story. But the first one is, get another opinion. And could you talk a little bit about that, what you meant by that?
Sure. I think, at least in my own scenario, because I was myopic, and because I felt so hurt, I was overreacting. In fact, the mentor who was a addiction specialist, he always used to say to me, "Feelings misinform." So sometimes if you're feeling upset or if you're in the middle of something emotionally, instead of reacting, talking it out with somebody first before you react to the person you're upset with could be a good thing to do. Sometimes I'll call my mom, and she and I will vent together about stuff going on. But there were other cases where, for example, this reverend that I taught with at Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen, she was really interesting to speak with. And I do have a rabbi that I love, Rabbi Joseph Krakow, who's my family rabbi in Michigan, and Jen Kaluzny. And then also there's a lot of, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a teacher or a mentor. So I think if, the advice I give, if something's bothering you, and, so quite often I'll be with a student, I have students of all ages, and they'll be so pissed off at a sibling or a spouse or a family member. And instead of overreacting too quickly, sometimes talking it out first, just to understand, what do you want from this scenario? There's a big difference if you want to end a relationship versus if you want someone to apologize, versus if you want to take a step back and have a little bit of distance there, but still be connected. So so if anything happens now when I get upset, I try not to overreact, step back, see if there's somebody I could talk to about it, to just kind of, get a second opinion. And I actually have a lot of people in my life who are really, they're brutally honest, and they'll just say to me, "You're completely overreacting. You're off the wall. It's the pandemic. Don't take it out on this person. It has nothing to do with them." And so, so if there's somebody in your life who you could talk things out with and tell the truth, I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, from the other perspective of when somebody gets really mad at you, like, people get mad at me all the time because, I make mistakes, but I also feel like, a lot of times, and I think a lot of us feel this way, like, I did the best I could, and yeah, there was like some other piece that maybe somebody didn't see, and it's kind of interesting to think about, like sometimes I think, don't they know that I'm actually like a good person, like, and that's the thing about like most of us, right? Like, most people are good people who do have that, like, who for whatever it is, like there is that I mean, for me, like the missing piece thing is so huge. I might be just perseverating on it all night, but like, so the getting the other perspective can take you back to where you need to be in terms of that. Okay, so the next thing you talked about was stay in contact. How do you do that with someone who's hurt you?
Well, there's a really fascinating story that I tell in, Forgiveness Store, which is a Jewish mom in Florida who's actually very close friends with the family, um, adored her two sons, and made a big wedding for her older son, and they were married, and two grandkids, and all of a sudden they kind of blew her off. They just like did not want her in their lives, and they didn't really explain why. And she was at a complete loss. She was completely confused. But instead of just listening and just like going away, she found little ways to communicate. So, for example, she would still send presents for the kids for their birthdays, or she would leave a phone message for her son saying, "I just wanted to say happy birthday. You don't have to call me back. I'm just thinking about you today." And every once in a while they would respond, and sometimes they wouldn't. And this really went on a long time. And she even apologized, even though she didn't even know what she did wrong. She kept apologizing, and it actually in the book led me to take that line from, Love Story, which is love means never having to say you're sorry. According to her, it means saying you're sorry 100 times, even if you didn't do anything wrong. And every once in a while they'd let her take the grandkids, and she would hang out with the grandkids, and they loved her. But then something would happen, and they would all of a sudden be inconsistent and take the grandkids back. 8 years later, and this has been driving her crazy, and she's still trying to understand it. She went to a therapist who told her, just give up and forget it because you're going to get hurt again, and she refused to do that. 8 years later, the two of them get divorced, and the son comes to her and says, "I'm so sorry. My wife was so crazy and jealous and possessive, and had this whole scenario where she just really wanted to be with our family, and she projected all this stuff. The woman was from a divorced family, and so she had this Prakakta theory that it wasn't good for him or the kids to be around her." And not only did they reconcile, the most fascinating part was she then became extremely close to her grandkids. And right after she told me the story, I was just looking on Facebook to see their pictures. And this really interesting thing, because both grandkids were like college age or graduate school age now, both of them used for their Facebook wallpaper a picture of them as little kids with their grandma.
Oh,
Years later, and they actually said to her, it was they were going through a lot. Talk about what you can't see. There was a lot of problems in the house, but they always remembered how kind the grandma was. And even if it was just that she dropped off a present, or there was a balloon for them, or the one time she came and let them watch TV with her in bed late, they remembered every kind thing she did. So that really stays with me. So I do think sometimes, with family disputes or, I think sometimes when people get upset, that the instinct is kind of like, forget it, to ghost someone. And I think that there's a lot of ways that one can keep in touch and be kind. I mean, even if a friend or a family member is angry at you, you can still text them and say happy birthday, or I'm thinking it's Hanukkah, or I'm thinking about you for the holidays. I mean, of course, it's hard because you have to, give up your pride a little bit. But so sometimes I do think being polite and keeping in touch is good. And in the case of my mentor, we tried emailing each other several times and it was extremely awkward, but nobody said, screw you. Like we sort of tried to dance around each other. And I'm glad we did, because when I later understood what he was going through, I realized he didn't want to be fighting with me and he didn't want to hurt me. And I think that by keeping in touch and trying, it paved the way for us to reconcile.
So the next thing on your list is write a checklist. And I'm just wondering also, like, what is the difference between that and is that similar to search for missing pieces of the story, or do you mean it in a different way?
It's
Oh,
a
you
little
want
bit
this?
different. It's a little bit different. I mean, I'll tell you where it comes from, which sort of fascinated me, which was I had a physical therapist, a Muslim physical therapist, Kenan, who was a victim of the Muslim genocide in Bosnia when he was 12. And he told me the story, came to some of my classes, and I told him to write about it. And he was incredibly angry and just felt he's never forgiving anybody. And he was just kind of stuck in his life. And I helped him write about it. We actually worked on 2 books together. But the most interesting thing that came out of it was we worked on a book called The Bosnia List, which was a memoir. And on the list, at age 30, he was going back to his country with a list of 12 people he wanted to avenge who betrayed his family. So it was his teacher who held a gun to his head, his karate coach, his best friend who screwed him over. And he had this list and he was enraged. And when he came back, we talked about everything that happened. But he couldn't, he's like, no forgiving, no closure, can't get over this. There's no way to get over it. And so I said to him, do me a favor. You've actually told me during the war that there was like one person in your building who slipped you money and someone else, another Christian Orthodox Serb who helped you guys get fake ID. Could you do me a favor and just write a list of every Serb that helped your family? And he said, I could count them on one finger. I'm like, no, I remember you told me some stories. Just humor me, do it. So he really set out to do it. And the list came back and there were 12 people. And it was so interesting because his mother used to say to him, they're good and bad in every people. And it was kind of fascinating that there were 12 Serbs who immediately betrayed him, who he wanted to avenge, and yet there were 12 people who also had been kind and basically saved his family's life. So that was not only the arc of the book, but it also lists. All of a sudden, it made me think of that. So just for an example, when I was upset with my mentor, there was something I couldn't see, which was a little bit separate, which was what's going on in his life now. But what I did was I went over things that happened in the past, and I wrote a list of everything kind he'd ever done for me. And he had done extremely kind, amazing things. He helped me get married. He helped me get clean and sober. He would answer the phone and answer my email every day when I was going through withdrawal. He loved my work. He would read my work, and that wasn't his job to read my work and tell me how brilliant it was. So I wound up writing a list of everything kind he did. And all of a sudden that put a little bit of a different spin on what was going on, and quite often if we're mad at a parent or a sibling or a partner or a relative or a friend, it's very easy to get caught up and heated in the moment. But if this is somebody who's been kind to you for a long time, or this is somebody who's come through for you in the past, sometimes if you write a list and you remember all the things that were good, that gives you a different perspective. And when I was done writing my list, it actually made me realize, even if the guy never says, I'm sorry, I'm going to forgive him just based on what he did. I don't have to see him in my life. He doesn't have to be in my life. But just for all these kind things that he did for me, I'm going to find it in my heart somewhere, just based on that kindness, to say, I forgive him. So sometimes that works.
I thought it was interesting that you said one of the things you said also was consider multimedia mea culpas. How is that a good idea?
Okay, so what happens is, and this happens to me all the time, I get people that just text me. I'm not a text person. I'm busy, I'm on Zoom, I don't want to be texted. But every once in a while, if I'm having a fight, you're trying to text me, I don't want to, if I get a handwritten letter or a handwritten card, that's a different story. And also, if somebody emails me and says, "Hey, I really would love to get a chance to hear your voice. Could we Zoom? Do you have a minute to Zoom so could I see your face, or could I talk to you on the phone?" Sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. So I try to say to people, try to be a little open-minded in terms of if you are trying to apologize to someone who's hurt and they're not answering your emails or they're not responding to your texts, maybe writing them a letter might be a better way to go. Or some people really, if you can't see them in person, Zoom, looking at somebody's face is a lot different than a text or an email. So I definitely think that helps. And I'll tell you something, when I was teaching right when the pandemic started, I had students from really all over the country, all over the world, a lot of undergrads that were going through hell. And some of them they wouldn't show their face on Zoom, or they wouldn't email me back. But a few of them, one was in the neighborhood in New York, and I said, "You want to do a walk?" So we took a mass walk around the park, and I had no idea everything that had gone on with her. Her mom was sick, she couldn't visit, she was losing her apartment, and just the walk made a huge difference. And the same thing, a few people asked if they could speak on the phone, and they just completely opened up in a way that they weren't comfortable. By the way, one person was embarrassed because there was no place for them to do Zoom, so they were like hiding in a weird little closet and they didn't want anyone to see it. So that was interesting. So yeah, so I would say, if you want to reconcile with someone, whether you've done something wrong or they're trying to get in touch with you, be a little bit open about how it's going to happen. If you can see them in person, that's great, but sometimes right now even that's still hard. But sometimes video works better, hearing someone's voice on a phone works better. So sometimes I think, just because you're the most comfortable emailing doesn't necessarily mean someone else is going to be.
So this week, I think it was in our Lunch and Learn class, we were talking about the idea, the Jewish concept of, that God is kind of, especially that we hear it over, the holidays, that God is always waiting for us, like to repent and change our ways, that there's always that opportunity, to kind of come back and kind of mend our path, or, whatever, however we want to say it. So you also say it's never too late. What do you mean by that?
Well, just for an example, I mean, one great example was, the mom who for 8 years kept apologizing and apologizing. And by the way, she's extremely close to her kids and grandkids still. I was ready to give up on my mentor, and not only are we still connected, we wrote a book together that was a bestseller and did good in the world. And I would also say that there was an author named Deborah Kopachin, who has a new book out that's called Lady Parts. She writes this fascinating forgiveness story, which is she was raped in college, and she really never got over it. It just always screwed her up when she thought about it. And during I think it was the Me Too movement and the Brett Kavanaugh trials, she just couldn't get it out of her head. So she wrote a letter to he had been a friend to the college guy, and she just said, "I want you to know, 30 years ago, this still haunts me. This still screws me up. You never apologized. You never said anything. I can't erase this from my life. And I just needed to write this letter." And he called her in 30 seconds and he was like, "Oh my God, I was a drunk. I went to AA. I blacked out constantly. I have no memory of this whatsoever, but I believe every word you've said to me. I'm so sorry. What can I do? I had no idea." And he just apologized and apologized. And interestingly, it was on Yom Kippur. And she just said, the pain washed out of her. The more he apologized and said, I'm sorry, the pain washed out of her 30 years later. And also, Joseph Krakow, my family's rabbi in Michigan, he does hospice work. And so before someone's dying, he asks them with their loved ones around them, he has them say a prayer. And the prayer is, I think it's, "I forgive you. Will you forgive me? I'm sorry. I love you." And he says it is absolutely astounding how even relatives that have been estranged for a long time. And it's not even a direct, I'm sorry for what I did. It's holding the person's hand and hearing them say, I forgive you. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I love you. Not only how often that helps, like, for example, a child who'd had a difficult relationship with their parents, but it really helps them in the grieving process. So a lot of times, say you've had an old fight with someone or you haven't talked to someone in years, never too late to, I'm thinking about you, text them or email them, or a card, thinking about you over the holidays. Happy anniversary, happy birthday. I just hope you're fine. I mean, sometimes maybe they're not going to answer, but maybe sometimes they will, or sometimes you can get through because they might be in a different place. So I love that idea that, it's really never too late for a heartfelt apology or to forgive somebody.
So one of the things I love about your book is that it does share, teachings from so many different faith traditions, and I'm totally fascinated by the idea of, seeking out all of these different, different religious leaders and experts. And so I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that, and but also, and I guess what made me think of this question is I was looking at, one of the last things that points that you make in this article, which I think has been a good guide for our discussion, is that you can forgive and then change the relationship. And you used an example that someone talked to, that somebody shared with you from the Quran. And I was just hoping that you could maybe talk about that. And then also just talk about what it was like meeting all these different, reaching out to these different faith leaders and what it was like to have these conversations.
Yeah, it was extremely illuminating. And so from the Quran, I spoke with an Islamic scholar who told me a story about the Prophet Muhammad forgiving a soldier for murdering his uncle in battle. But after he forgave the soldier, Muhammad added, as much as possible, don't come before me, which to me seemed to be an ancient version of, you're forgiven, now get out of my face forever. And I was very fascinated by that. And I'll tell you, there was another story in the book, in Forgiveness Tour, that really exemplified this. People have the misconception that if you forgive somebody, you have to then hang out with them again, or all of a sudden you're involved with them again. You have the same relationship that you did. Nothing's going to change. You're going to go back to toxic patterns, but that's not the case. So there was a story about a man, humanistic Jew, Gary Weinstein, who is in Michigan, a jeweler, and he lost his wife and two sons to a drunk driver. And Gary decided to forgive the drunk driver in court. He publicly read a statement, I forgive you, because Gary wanted to be a part of a forgiving, healthy conversation in the world, and he wanted to honor his wife and the memory of his two kids. Now, I don't think he ever saw the man again. I don't think he ever wants to see the man again. The man is in jail for a lot of years. He did specify that he doesn't want the man to ever get in a car. He can never drive again. So he didn't forgive the man for the man. He forgave him for himself. He was almost like giving a present to himself and to honor his family and his belief in humanistic Judaism and his spirituality and psychology. And we've done events together, Gary Weinstein, and he actually talks a lot about how that helped him move on. So I think that that's something that was really interesting, and it actually helped me with my mentor, because I did not want to go back to our previous relationship where I was paying him to do addiction therapy, and he had sort of this authority over me, because I thought, there was too much water under the bridge for that, and also there was too much bad stuff going on in his life. But what was interesting was I accepted his apology, and there's a scene of it in the book, and I'm like, oh no, now what? Like, I'm forgiving him, but I don't want to go back. And I actually came up with the idea. He'd always wanted to write an addiction book based on his 30 years of addiction therapy. So I suggested we do the book. And it was a great change, because instead of him being in control, that's my domain, because I had written and published books. He had helped me. So we were on much more even footing. In fact, if anything, I was in control of the book. And then the book did really well. And I got one of my biggest goals in life, which was to be a New York Times bestseller. So that actually proved to me how fruitful reconciliation was, because it would not have happened if I didn't forgive him. So yeah, so I would say the whole journey and being open to talk to people and being open to change, I think was it was really important for me.
Yeah.
And hopefully, I mean, people always ask me, why did it take you 10 years to write the book? And one of the reasons it took 10 years is because the original falling out I had involved, what he lied to me about was it involved him seeing a student of mine who he told me that he wouldn't see. And then all of a sudden I saw her coming out of his office, and it turned out they'd both been lying to me for 6 months. And it sort of blew my mind. Why would these people lie to me? But so I didn't want to write a negative book that trashed therapy, which sort of saved my life. The addiction therapy was so important to me, or that said anything negative about a student, because I love teaching and I love my students. So I felt like it didn't make sense to me to put anything. I already had some books out. I didn't want to put anything out in the world that was just going to be negative or toxic or repeat negativity. So in a weird way, by looking for wisdom, and sharing the wisdom that people gave me. And I interviewed 13 people who had horrible wrongs that happened to them that were never righted, that didn't get the apologies they wanted. And by everybody sharing their wisdom for me, I felt like I came up with a book that could help people and and do good in the world. So then that's why it took so long, because it took me so long to figure out how to turn this horrible experience into something um, you know, something that shared the wisdom that everybody gave me.
Yeah. And so how did you structure the book then? Is it structured around the different interviews, or is it?
Yeah. So what happened was I started the book with the horrible argument that I had with him, and I really went there and just played it out. And then truthfully, I sort of went nuts. I really had I had a horrible reaction, because this was somebody who this was my mentor for like 15 years. So it was like I think the line I used was my crisis management strategy became my crisis, where I just didn't know how to deal. And also, I had stopped smoking and drinking, and all of a sudden he wasn't there to help me, and so I was afraid I was going to relapse. So it was really had a really bad reaction to it. But I journaled. One of the things he taught me is I kept a journal, and every basically um, everywhere I went, and all my students and my husband and everybody I saw, they'd say, "What's going on?" And they could tell that I was not my normal self. And I would tell them. And then I somehow got into saying to them, I think after I told the story, every single person I would tell, and he never apologized. So how can I forgive someone who can't apologize? Every single person would tell me a story about somebody did something horrible to them, and they never apologized for it. And I started getting fascinated, because everyone had a story like that. So I started writing them down, and some of them were like, I mean, again, Bosnian war survivor. The Serb government never apologized for 300,000 murders. How is he supposed to move on? They didn't lose the war. There was no apology. There was no reparation. How do you move on from that? And a close friend, Manny Mandel, who's a Holocaust survivor,
Mm.
interestingly, he not only never forgave the Germans, the Nazis, he thrived out of spite. So I was like, how do you do that? So I wound up interviewing. I picked 13 of the most extreme stories, and I just kept writing it, and I sort of had a rough draft, and I really didn't know where it was going. And then fascinatingly, my mentor then apologized. And so I tried to put the whole thing together, but it took a really long time. And what I wound up doing, and I sort of explained it in the author's note, is even though I had a first draft, I wound up being so fascinated by some of the interviews and some of the clergy, like the Vatsal, who grew up Hindu, and the Islamic scholar, and the reverend, and another priest, that I went back and interviewed them even more. So I kind of tried to flesh out what are the differences in forgiveness. I mean, every religion does seem to have a little bit of a different take. And it was sort of interesting that Islam and Judaism were the closest, which was they both really say repentance. You have to, in order to be forgiven, you really got to repent, which is interesting. Whereas there were other religions like Hindu and Confucianism, and Zen Buddhism, that they had a bigger overview. That were human beings can't see anything, and they really have to get a larger view, and you have to get out of your little myopic headed world. Christianity was an interesting one, because you have Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, which appears to be kind of a blanket forgiveness, with Jesus saying, forgive these people that are crucifying me. But then what's this interesting contradiction is their concept of hell. Because if you don't repent, you go to hell forever. So anyway, I got very into the obsessively into the different religions. So I did go back for a while and try to clarify and do a little bit more research.
Totally fascinating. I want to open this up to if anyone has a question. I'll take one. Does anyone have a question? Raise your hand. Judy, I'm going to go to you. Just unmute yourself first, Judy.
Well, you might like it better if I don't. But anyway,
No.
two thoughts occurred to me. At first, I really wanted to know what was the terrible thing your mentor had done, but you've answered that. Thank you. And I wonder if you have thought about it seems to be an anniversary of Dylan Roof and his murders at the Mother Emanuel Church. And he is still on death row, and he is still apparently in line to be executed. But the way repentance changed history, the people who had every right to hate him for killing their relatives, at least it got the Confederate flag taken down, across the South, when they somehow their forgiving him opened up something pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I tried to do in the book was get rid of the mythology of everybody should radically forgive everybody everything. So I do think it's idiosyncratic. And I think there are actually times when not forgiving is self-protective and healthy. So I think, I think it's really up to the victims, what would help them move on. I mean, there was one really weird story in the book that fascinated me, which was a woman who'd been sexually abused by her father was pushed by clergy to forgive him. And she forgave him when she was 16, and then he tried again.
Oh.
And she was empowered in the book to tell me that she unforgave him. And that was her, and it was very cathartic for her to unforgive him and take back her power. So on one hand, our impulse and the religious impulse seems to be forgive everybody everything, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's very individualistic. And I also think whether somebody repents is huge too. Whether somebody repents and to what extent. I mean, Manny, for example, with the Holocaust, part of what he said was that by the time the German government publicly apologized, the people who did it weren't apologizing. They were mostly dead. And there was still a budding neo-Nazi movement in Germany. So it didn't seem to quell the fear that this could ever happen again. Interestingly, what he said too, which I found fascinating, was that the part that helped his family most was the reparation, because his family got something like $1,000 a month for many years, which allowed his father to move on. So he actually believed, out of all the parts of an apology, screw them. He didn't even care that they did the official statement that doesn't bring back dead people, his dead relatives. But the fact that they gave his family money so that his dad could move on and have a house and a better life, that meant a lot to him. So, maybe there's a victim that feels that way. I mean, I definitely found that people who were doing well in their own life were able to forgive more, and people who didn't have money or who were sick or didn't have a good place to live or didn't have love in their life, it was harder. So sometimes if a reparation could heal somebody on some level, that would be a good step.
So is there another question that I can take? Marcia. You're not going to go. Does anyone else? Then I'll jump up. Oh, Judy, unmute yourself then. Sorry.
There was another story. Maybe it's in your book. Are you familiar with Eve Ensler?
Yeah.
And the book she wrote, she ghost wrote the apology that she needed to hear that she never got.
Yes, I love that. And by the way, I do ask several people in the book, tell me the apology you want to hear. And by the way, if there's somebody who hurt you, or if there's something unresolved, that's a really, really great method to get in touch with your hurt and what you want. And actually, and that, you know, and weirdly, that's what Deborah Kopigan, that's what she did when she confronted the guy. She told him what she wanted, and he was able to come through for her. So I do think that that could be a really interesting technique to use if there's something unresolved. And by the way, I actually really appreciate it. Sometimes people come to me and they'll say, "I'm so mad that you did this thing, and I always wanted you to." I had a student that said they were always mad because they didn't feel like I liked their work, and when they I guess they posted something and I didn't publicly say I liked it, and they were really annoyed with me. And I was so glad he said that, because then I went and read it and I said, "It's great, I love it, fantastic, a bunch of stars." And he sort of gave, I mean, I had no idea that for 20 years it had been bothering him. I have, you know, I can have 100 students a term. I had no idea. I thought I liked him. I mean, I helped him get published. I had no idea he'd been harboring this. So I do think you can't assume people can read your mind, and that, you know, and especially people who are screwed up or who were on drugs or alcohol or were abused themselves, they don't necessarily remember what they did, or they don't necessarily know how they hurt you. So I actually thought what Eve did was brilliant artistically, but also, you know, there were people who did that in the book. This is the apology that I want. And by sharing it with the person, kind of got it. That happened actually with Kenan. He, I think in Bosnia List, he wrote clearly about how upsetting it was for him to never hear any apology from any Orthodox Christians served for what they did to his people. And very interestingly, he got a letter from the child of someone who'd been a soldier who was dead. And the child, who was now Kenan's age, apologized to him and said, "I wish my father would have been able to apologize. He died, but I want to apologize." And it was very moving. I'll actually tell you the end to it, which also just even just writing about it and talking about it was a great thing. So after Kenan wrote the book, he kind of went from being a 12-year-old, felt very powerless, you know, watching what happened to his people getting exiled. He wrote the book, and he kind of became a spokesperson for his people. And he always told me when he was exiled at 12, so he said, unlike his older brother, he never got to do anything cool in his homeland. He never got to drive a car, could never go to a bar and have a drink, and he'd never been with a girl. So I wrote the line, "I'd never kissed a girl from home." So the book comes out, and all these women from the Balkans, all over the Balkans, are sending him like naked pictures, and "I want to meet you, and I will kiss you." And all the grandmothers and aunts are saying, "Here, marry my niece," because he's a successful, handsome American 30-year-old. "Marry my niece, marry my granddaughter." And the nicest email he got on Facebook, the nicest instant message, was from a woman named Mirala in Sarajevo, who wrote, "Thank you for speaking out for our people. I lost my father around the same time you lost my mother. Your book meant a lot to me." They got in touch. They FaceTimed. She is now his wife.
Wow.
And she's having his baby, and it's Bosnian next week. And he always says, "So by facing down my past, I found my future." So I do think if there's something bothering you, and I'm a shrinkaholic. I've been in therapy a long time, unlike the rest of my family. But if there's something bugging you, don't let it go. Write about it, journal about it, contact the person. Sometimes they won't be able to come through, but sometimes they will. Sometimes you'll be able to, or sometimes even just the process of putting it out there. You know, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups where people just put out things that really upset them, that they can't get over. And just by talking it out with people, sometimes it is liberating.
So, unless there's any other questions, I just wanted to ask you. You've written a lot of books, and I know you also teach. You've referred to it several times. You teach writing, and so could you just tell us a little bit more about that work?
Yeah, for many years, I taught writing at NYU, the New School in Columbia, and I would teach these sort of 15-week, 4-hour classes. And they had to be academic because they were for credit, but I wanted to do something a little different. So I called it the Instant Gratification Took Too Long School of Writing, where the goal of my classes are to write a great piece by the end of the class that you get published. So that was always my thing. So I teach for other schools online, but I thought, let me just try my own Zoom classes during the pandemic, and they really took off. So they're short and sweet. They're just 5 weeks, 2 hours each. And I bring in all different editors from all the publications I write for. So the New York Times, Washington Post, New Yorker, New York Magazine. And we're really, really specific about If you want to get published, this is what you write. And one of my books is a writing book I use for my classes called the Byline Bible. So I give away all my favorite assignments. So one of my favorite assignments is write 3 double-spaced type pages about your most humiliating secret. And I cannot tell you, not only do people, that's how Kenneth started, because none of his friends in Connecticut or where he worked in New York knew that he was embarrassed about his past and that he had been exiled from his own country. That was his secret, and that started a book. And interestingly, the book that I did with my mentor, we started it with his humiliation essay was that his mother was an alcoholic, a raging alcoholic, and that's why he became an addiction specialist. So a lot of books have started that way. And interestingly, one TV series about someone who was bipolar, whose mother helped them get over bipolar, and one movie about a woman who ran a sex phone ring in college when she was a virgin. Like, people would pay her and she would be in her pajamas and her foot pajamas eating a pizza, and she would be like, yeah baby, and she wrote a funny piece about it, and it became the movie For a Good Time Call. So I teach people how to do that. And then I started another class, which is Sell Your First Book class, which is if anybody has a book idea. Right now, so far, I have 17 books out in 8 different genres. So I used to feel that I'm like a literary dabbler and no one's going to take me seriously. But then I realized the great thing about it is I have a very good overview. If somebody has a book project, should it be fiction? Should it be a memoir? Should it be self-help? So I'm really good at that. So so I've been teaching online. So yeah, if anybody wants to email me, my direct email is profsue123@gmail.com. In fact, let me see if I could put it in. I'm going to put it in the chat. So anybody could email me, profsue123@gmail.com, if they want to find out about it. And sometimes I do, I'll do a one-shot essay seminar, and sometimes I do events just like this, sometimes I'll have editors and agents and we'll just do a one-shot panel. If people just want to, this is how you sell a book. This is how you sell an essay. So it's very fun. And I can't believe how much I like Zoom, because I'm kind of a technophobe and I'm old, but I love Zoom.
Well, I think so. I want to thank you so much for your time tonight and for talking to us. I mean, I think, I don't know about everyone else. This is definitely what I needed in terms of helping me transition into, really we're so close to the Yamim Noraim, to the days of awe, and we've been doing that work. We're in the middle of the month of Elul, the month that we're supposed to be doing the introspection and thinking about how we've missed the mark and how we can, make things right with the people, in our lives. And this has really been super helpful for me, and I'm sure for all of us. I just want to remind you all, first, that Susan's book is called The Forgiveness Tour: How to Find the Perfect Apology. It would be our hope that you will buy this at your local independent bookstore. We always want to support our local independent bookstores, but of course you can find it on Amazon. And in the next day or two, I will send out a link to this talk. You can share it with friends. And also with that link will come a link to the book on Amazon, a link to Susan's website. And if it's okay with you, Susan, I'll send out your email so that, if people want to write you about those classes, which sound totally fascinating, and I think I'm in for one of them.
Sure. What else I love is after I do these events, some people, they don't like to talk on the Zoom, but then they email me the apology that they're owed that they've never been given. And those are fascinating stories if anybody wants to email me that.
Yeah, I think they're terrific. So, I mean, it's a terrific idea, and I definitely think we're gonna, it would be it's actually a great program for me to do at our temple. So thank you for helping me plan that. So friends, thank you so much for coming. We look forward to seeing you again. Susan, thank you for your time and for this really wonderful book and for so many incredible thought-provoking stories. And we have obviously a lot more to learn from you. There are another 14 books after this one to choose from, and the opportunity to learn from you from other ways. So have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Great to meet you, Lisa. Thank you.